In order to get our valve cover, we need to remove the 3 hex bolts holding on the shield. To remove our airbox, we undo the clips holding on the box. Then we unscrew the intake hose from the throttle body, followed by undoing the breather hose from our valve cover. Then we undo all of our vacuum lines. To free the airbox assembly, we gently pull towards us and twist. To finish the airbox removal, we disconnect our connector. To remove our strut bar, it's just 2 13mm bolts on each side. The purpose of the strut bar is to add rigidity to the car suspension. This maintains pressures on both sides so that the car remains more balanced. Next, let's remove the OBD2 port located on the bar and put it aside. And now we can fully remove our strut bar. Now let's remove our hose going to the brake booster. Let's also remove our vacuum line going to our intake manifold motor. Now we unplug our first 3 coil packs. Don't be afraid if the connector clips break. I have an awesome trick to fix this. Plastics degrade over time due to heat. Let's pull off yet another hose. Next, we remove our throttle body. We remove the 4 10mm bolts and carefully put our throttle body to the side. To ensure that I don't lose my bolts, I rethread them back in their respective places. Next, we remove our 2 10mm nuts holding on our vacuum rail. Then we disconnect our sensors and unclip our wire. Finally, we move our rail off to the side. Using an E-Torx, we disconnect our coil pack harness. To ensure cleanliness and avoid leaves falling into the motor, I vacuum up all the debris. Next, we remove the 4 hex bolts holding on the intake manifold. Then we use the 14mm to remove the 2 end nuts holding on the manifold. We must then move the metal bracket off to the side. Now we remove the 3 bolts on the 3 support brackets holding and supporting our manifold. They are located in the rear of the manifold. Finally, we use an E-Torx to remove the 2 end studs on the manifold. This will allow us to easily slide our manifold off. Now carefully remove your manifold. Make sure nothing is snagging or holding the manifold back. To avoid leaves, nuts, bolts, and even sockets from falling into the engine and ruining your day, plug the intake ports with shop towels or even tape. Let's remove our upper radiator hose to gain a clearer access for removing our forward valve cover. Now let's remove our 3 10mm bolts and carefully remove our 3 coil packs. Now we remove all of our 10mm bolts surrounding our valve cover. Then we use a pry bar and gently release our valve cover. Remove the valve cover off to the side, then clean the mating surface of the head with some brake clean, as well as clean off some of the leftover silicone and gasket. Let's prep our valve cover for a new gasket. First, remove the worn gasket. Look how brittle that is. Next, we thoroughly clean our valve cover. We use a hammer and a screwdriver to create separation of the seal from the cover. As you can see, there are tabs to hold our tube seals in place. We need to flip over our cover and open the tab to fit our tube seals in snug. The purpose of these tube seals are to prevent oil from leaking into the spark plugs, which can eventually cause a misfire. You can tell that these go bad by if you remove a coil pack or plug wire and see oil dripping from the coils. It's always a good rule of thumb to replace these when you're doing the cover gasket. These seals always come in a set if your car has them. Every car is different. Next, we add some silicone to all parts that have separation. I see 3 parts, so I'll add silicone to all 3 parts. Then we carefully install our freshly clean valve cover. Be careful, sometimes the gasket can fall off. When installing the cover, press down on it firmly to ensure it sits properly. Now we can confidently reinstall our valve cover bolts. I know what everyone's thinking. Ryan, where's the torque wrench? Well, when you do it as long as I do, you become the torque wrench. But for all you torque nuts out there, here it is. 106 inch-pounds or 9 foot-pounds in a crisscross pattern. While we are here, let's replace our plugs. This vehicle is going to run amazing. We are replacing our plugs with OEM standard iridium plugs. Never gap iridium plugs, they are soft and easy to break. Gently place the plugs into the tubes and torque them to 18 foot-pounds. Now reinstall all 3 coil packs and tighten down all 3 10mm bolts. Now let's work on the rear valve cover. It's exactly the same procedure. Remove the coil packs, remove all the bolts, and maneuver the valve cover out of the way. Once the valve cover is removed, we then work on replacing our gasket and all 3 spark plug tube gaskets. It's the exact same technique. Hammer out and gently pry the old ones. Clean the cover and then reinstall. Let's replace our PCV valve. Using a 19mm socket can help us achieve this. The purpose of a PCV valve is to reroute the blow-by gas into the intake, which will mix with fresh air and recycle in the combustion process. This helps us reduce emissions. Finally, we install our new cover gasket and get ready for installation. When you have all this available room, take advantage of this time and replace the rear plugs as well. It's always good practice to replace all your plugs at the same time. Remember, iridium plugs are never gapped. Just open the box and install. Let's work on finishing this job. Reinstall the upper radiator hose and clamp it back in its place. Remember the trick I said I was going to show? Well, here it is. The connector for the coil pack is broken and it happens all the time due to heat. The trick to keeping this secure is inserting a zip tie and pulling the zip tie while installing the connector. You'll hear a click, and that means that it's locked. Again, insert the zip tie, insert the connector, and pull the zip tie until you hear a click. Don't forget to trim the excess. Releasing the connector is easy. Just lift the zip tie up slightly and it'll free the coil pack. To ensure that the rear cover sits properly with the gasket, you can see it by looking from the underneath of the vehicle. Let's move our attention to our intake manifold. Anytime you remove your intake, always replace the gasket. These are what I like to call smush gaskets. They flatten to give a good seal. These are basically a one-time use. Reinstall the PCV hose, which connects to the intake from the PCV valve on the cover. Remove all the paper towels from the intake ports. The PCV hose goes all the way to the PCV valve on the valve cover. Install the manifold, then reinstall the bracket and torque down the 2 studs and bolts to lock our manifold in place. Now let's reinstall our vacuum line rail, tighten the 2 10mm nuts, and reconnect our sensors. Reinsert our line back to the throttle body. Using a throttle body cleaner, let's clean our butterfly. Over time, carbon deposits build similar to how plaque builds on teeth. Cleaning the throttle body will result in a better running motor. After this, we replace our gasket and tighten the 4 10mm bolts holding on the throttle body. Next, plug in your electrical connector to the throttle body. To properly support the intake manifold, reinstall the 3 brackets that hold the intake manifold up. Reinstall the brake booster vacuum hose to the throttle body. Next, reinstall your airbox and hook up the breather hose to the front valve cover. Next, hook up the vacuum line back to the intake manifold motor. Reinstall all your vacuum lines back to your airbox. Use the clip to secure the airbox. Then connect the mass airflow sensor. Tighten the clamp from the intake tube to the throttle body. Next, grab the strut bar and carefully place it in its respective place. Install the 2 14mm nuts on both sides and tighten them down. Secure your data link connector back to the strut bar. Secure the harness back to the strut bar. Check the oil to make sure that it hasn't lost any due to the massive oil leaks. Run the car and take it for a test drive to make sure there are no leaks. Reinstall the front cover and tighten down all 3 nuts.